Hey guys, I'm Chris with Dream Studios. I am back with a new video. This time we are doing a build-up demonstration. So let's go ahead and get cracking. Welcome to the Studio Scale Alien Narcissus tutorial build-up series. This is part 2 of a multi-part series. In episode 1, we took the raw Narcissus kit parts, trimmed them, assembled, detailed, and base painted in white. In this episode, we will weather and distress the model using primarily graphite powder. Some airbrush techniques are used, and some overspray techniques, but the main weathering tool is graphite powder. We then move on to applying water slide decals. We'll finish with a look at the finished museum quality display model. Let's get started. Alright everyone, welcome to part 2 of this tutorial, the full build-up for the Alien Narcissus. This is the last beauty pass, the last time I'm going to see this model clean and pristine. We are ready for weathering. Now we're going to be doing this in a couple different techniques. Going to do a little bit of airbrushing, going to do a little bit of wash into the side trim. We are going to be using graphite powder. This is a new technique for me. I've only used it one time, very briefly on something, on just one small part, but this entire model gets a coating of graphite powder. I'm going to show you how I do that. And one thing also I'm doing differently is very instinctually, I always apply my water slide decals first and then weather. We're not doing it for this model. We're applying the water slide decals after all of my filtering and weathering passes. This is because you don't want the edges of these water slide decals to catch any of the graphite. So if I were to apply, say, one of these pieces here to where it's supposed to go, when I'm rubbing that graphite powder, it's going to want to find that edge. Don't really want that. I want these to be clean. I want these to be on top of the weathering. If these need weathering afterwards, we can put it on after. But save your water slide decals for after your weathering passes. Alright, I think I am ready to start. Let me show you some of the tools I'm using. I've got a very stiff art brush. I cut off the ends just to give me a more blunt tip. So I can kind of press it into the panel lines with a lot of control. And it's a little brush. It's just this little guy. You're also going to want to pick up kneaded rubber. This is an off-brand I got from Amazon. Works fine. This package here I think was about 10 bucks, 11 bucks. This is going to be useful for removing any unwanted graphite powder. And guys, this makes a little bit of a mess, so for sure I'm going to be wearing my gloves, and a little goes a long way. I can probably weather 500 Narcissus with this large bottle of graphite. Also, before we start this, we want to seal our model completely. Make sure that you block off these windows so they don't catch the crystal clear sealer. And that's what I'm using. The Rust-Oleum Matte Clear. The entire model, besides those canopy windows, got a coat of that crystal clear. That's going to give us a nice, even finish to start with. So make sure you put it on light also. Don't go too heavy with that crystal clear. You start going on too heavy, you might cause problems, drips. Looking at our reference images, we can see that the model is still very bright. It's very white. The weathering is inside, underneath the raised panel. So all of the dips have some weathering. There's not a whole lot of wash going on the top panels, but they are on the edges of the recesses. There's some dark stuff going on here. Dark up here. So I'm going to follow this guide as best I can. This is a new technique for me. And you know, before I start, special shout out to Andy Preston, Mark Inklen, Lee Stringer. These guys have done really amazing build-ups. But so walking on the backs of these guys when I do this weathering here. I chopped up the kneaded rubber into little manageable strips. And I'm taking these strips and just pressing them flat a little bit, just so I have a little more real estate to rub to remove graphite. I also decanted some of the graphite into a little container. So I think I'll start up here. And I'm just going to start rubbing this powder into those recesses. Let's go ahead and do this section right here. Then I think I might time-lapse this. So rubbed into these recesses, across here, across this. Across this line. I think I might go one more up. And guys, when you do this, just wear some painter's clothes. Crappy clothes that you don't care if they get stained, because this is messy work. Okay, so I'm going to start there. I'm going to grab this flattened piece of kneaded rubber, and I'm a little dark over here, so I'm going to rub some of this off. These panels are fairly clean looking, so I can remove, just like that, some of that graphite. And that's the idea, is to get it rubbed into these crevices, wiped off where it's not needed, and then I'll decide later if I'm going to overspray this with white. I know there's some areas that are going to be more saturated with the graphite, but I'm going to go ahead and do this on time-lapse just a little bit, get some of these panels. Then we'll move on to some of the more specific weathering zones. This high detail strip here gets a little bit more of the attention on the dark side of this graphite powder. Looks like there's a lot of buildup going on inside of this stuff. So I'm going to lay it on a little bit heavier on the top of this, across this, inside of this. It's pretty dark. On top of here, dark. And then it's lighter across the bottom. I'm going to make sure I dig some of this graphite powder into these crevices. Looks like it's kind of dark over here. Okay, I'm just going to go in stages. Then I'm going to grab this kneaded rubber, bring out those highlights. Boy, it's a big thanks to Andy Preston on his video on this technique. And this is very forgiving. I can always come back in here. If something got too dark, I could just rub it right away. I am loving this technique already. So you can see virgin up here and then weathered. Really makes it come to life. And I'm finding that if you have an area that you feel is too dark, like I might, just for giggles, lighten this up a little bit. Just grab a fresh piece of your kneaded rubber, smash it in, and it takes away that graphite. And just keep rubbing. Just make sure to keep it bright. This is a very white model in the end. A little heavy here, right here. So I'm going to grab a nice fresh, this side's getting kind of used, so I'm going to grab this freshie, press it right here, and there you go. It lifts up some of that graphite, lightens it up. So you get the idea. Let's keep going. As we work our way further down to the stern, it's less weathered. So I'm going in much lighter. I'm just going to do some shadowing into these pipes. Just get a little bit of tone, but not super duper heavy. I'm going to keep all these highlights. Just keep rubbing away if it gets too heavy. I decided I'm going to airbrush the vector thrusters here on the side with some black or some very dark gray. Same with inside those engines, just a tiny bit. But before I flip this model over, I want to darken up all these vents. These trimmed out vents here. And I'm going to go kind of heavy. I switch to a smaller brush. I'm just going to catch each one of these vents with a lot of that graphite powder. And then we're going to rub off the excess because I want these vents to be kind of dark. I'm finding if you just very slightly wet a paper towel with isopropyl alcohol, it'll clean up that edge and give you that nice profound trim look. Same idea for the bottom. I've already done that half. So it's just the same procedure. I'm going to go ahead and time lapse. What I'm doing too is once I dip into my graphite, I'll tap the brush down on the ground a little bit. I didn't do it right here. So you can see I have like a really super dark spot, which might work, which might not. If I want to lighten it up, I'll just grab that kneaded rubber and push it in. And right there, you can see instantly lightens it right up. I have one more tip for you. In order to brighten up some of these panels, I had some shading on some of these panels that were just a little bit too aggressive. So I wanted to brighten them up. I put just a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on a paper towel. They brightened right up. So I'm just kind of going around, taking a quick look at some of these panels. If I have extra shading happening, I'm just giving them a quick wipe. Changing my paper towels periodically. I've already gone through a few here. And just making some final little adjustments. Once I am well and satisfied with the graphite powder weathering, I'm going to go ahead and seal this with a little bit more of that crystal clear. Go on really light with your crystal clear. You can always add more graphite, but you can't really take the graphite away once you seal it. If you examine the model really closely, you'll see that there's a little bit more weathering on this little strip this side of the model. It's on the other side too. Not as much on the top, but here it's a little bit darker. And I think the reasoning for that is the docking clamp was clamped onto it from here back. So that's why this half of the model is less weathered than the front. So I've got a little bit of a gray here. I'm going real light, and I'm just going to darken up this panel very slightly just to break up that color. So when I peel this back, it should be a little bit darker on this side. Oh yeah, see? Right there, a little bit of that division. I'm going to darken up these thrusters, these side vectors, so just a little bit of diluted out acrylic paint. Very controlled. I'll do that for the other side so it's nice and smoky in there, much more visible. It's up to you really how you want to handle inside the engine nozzles. In the life-size prop they built, they're pretty clean. We don't really know what the inside of these nozzles look like on the filming miniatures, but I like the way they look clean. I'm going to keep them mostly clean, but I'm going to smoke them out just a little bit. Just a tad touch. Just a few touches in here, just to tone it. I'll do the same thing inside of these nose cone pits. Just darken them a little bit. Make them look a tiny bit weathered. Okay, time for water slide decals. I'm going to show you something on these decals, and then I'm immediately not going to use them. So these are little hash marks. They kind of got a little green-blue color. I've seen some replicas that use that, but when you really look at the screen-used model, these are the little hash points I'm talking about. They're actually not done with water slide decals. They are done with, here's a nice one to see. They're done with a little frisket and more graphite powder wiped on there. So I'm going to do the frisket. I'm just going to use regular painter's tape. I'm just going to follow this example. I see them across here, mostly on the underside. I think there's a couple on the top side. There's a couple there. There's a few here. So I'm going to make friskets out of painter's tape, and then I'll either airbrush those guys on or I will use a little bit more graphite powder. I've got a few friskets mapped out here. I can just peel these up and reuse them in the various areas. So I'm going to do it both ways. I'm going to do this one as graphite. We'll see how that one looks. And then this one, I'm going to airbrush. I've got a very faint gray mixed up here. Just very carefully. Just going to hit that. There's our airbrush mark. That is really good. Here is our graphite powder mark. Pretty good too. Kind of dark. I'm liking this fainter one better. So I think instead of using graphite powder for these, I'm going to airbrush that subtle gray color. I noticed looking at that photo really closely that there's a couple dark squares here on the edges. I mean, this is just dumb extreme detail, but I'm here. May as well do it. There are several little drilled out holes in this model. I'm just blackening them with a little bit of acrylic paint on an incense stick. And when you examine the film used model, you see them here, there's some here, they're just kind of like here and there. There's a couple right there. So those aren't drill out holes. I'm just going to introduce those with a Sharpie. So for example, I'm seeing two dots that are here on this detail underneath it. So I'm going to do 1, 2. So that's going to take care of those dots. So just kind of go around your model. I see another one here that's right outside of this. Just pressing that Sharpie, just kind of holding it for a second, and there is your spot. And if you really want to go deep dive, there's a little panel here, a faint panel line that goes across and down. So with a sharpened pencil and a straight edge, I'm going to judge where that first panel line is. It's about right there. So it's the pencil line, and then it goes down, probably about right there. So I'm going to start right at that edge, draw down, deep dive, tiny little panel line. And now, at last, we get into the water slide decals. I'm not going to get into a big how-to on this. It's just that you want to have your micro set and micro saw handy, a little brush, some cotton buds, a little tray of water, your scissors. We're going to go ahead and separate these decals and start getting to work on applying these beautiful markings. I'll do a few of these decals on camera, and I think I might do a time lapse or do a lot of them off camera, but I'll start with a little primer on this. So this here, near the canopy, is this piece and this piece. So I'm going to be soaking both of these in water. They don't need to stay in the water for very long. Now, to prep my surface, I'm going to use a little bit of the micro set. Now, I have a whole video on this, an entire separate video that's very detailed, extreme granular detail on water slide decals. So I'll put a link for that in the description. I'm just going to prep the surface by applying a little bit of this micro set. Okay, I'm going to yank these guys out of the water. I'm going to pad the bottom dry a little bit, the top dry a little bit, and I'm going to slide this guy into position. Roughly into the right spot. Like this. And looking at my reference shots, get him lined up correctly. That's about right. And then the other dude. And this other guy is gonna live over here. About there. I'm going to grab a cotton bud. I'm going to wick away that top moisture. Very nice. And then I'm going to go on top of that with a little bit more of this micro set. And when that microset cures, these are going to be sealed in place. You can also use microsol if you're going around any kind of panel lines, if we're going deep into a cut-in, or we're coming out of a inset. The microsol will help that decal contour to that surface. There's not a whole lot of that going on with this, so I think my microset will work, but keep this on hand also, just in case we need it. Just refer to your reference shots and get cracking. this xenomorph, optional piece. He could be hanging out of that back hatch. I'm going to start him out with a flat black. Off camera, I gave this some dry brush with brown mixed with yellow, kind of went back and forth. Just did a quick little thing. Then I attached him to some baling wire. I drilled a hole in the bottom of that hatch, and just as an option, this guy can live out here on this wire. Alright, all my decals are applied, top and bottom. I am going to overspray just a little bit of white. I'm going to lighten up some of these panels. I think I got a little bit excited. It looks great, but I think it might look a little better with some of the panels being a little bit lighter. Brighten up this model just a little bit. Just spraying some diluted flat white paint. You might notice that the top here is just a little bit lighter. I just hit with a little bit of flat white, just hit some of the panels very carefully that were getting a little bit dark. So I'm a lot happier now with the full brightness. And when you are all done, a little bit of goof off on these windows, because no matter how careful you are, you're going to get a little bit of residue paint and overspray on these windows. So I polished them up nice and bright again. And I think that's it. Let's go ahead and wrap this model up and go take some beauty shots and some beauty stills. This concludes episode 2 of the Alien Narcissus build-up tutorial series. There is a future tutorial coming soon that will demonstrate the deluxe version of this kit that includes a full interior cockpit module. That tutorial will also feature steps on welding an internal steel frame, welding a display base, and wiring in several points of electronics. Follow this channel to see the notification when that video goes live. Thanks for watching.